Welcome back to Hillbilly Pillars and my countdown slash ranking of Bob Dylan's studio albums. I'm super stoked, man. We have reached my top 10. It's been a long ride here, and I'm ready to get to it. At number 10, I have 2020's Rough and Rowdy Ways. For my ranking purposes and my list, this is Bob Dylan's most recent studio album. He's also had Shadow Kingdom, but I didn't count that as it was just a revisit of previous songs from his catalog. So anyway, yep, I have 2020's Rough and Rowdy Ways. At the beginning of COVID, in March of 2020, out of nowhere on social media, Bob Dylan dropped a 17-minute song called Murder Most Foul. It was the longest recorded release song of his career. And it was a fascinating, large piece that it kind of was a revisit of the JFK assassination that molds and evolves into a summation of America since the time Bob Dylan started recording music in the early 60s. It was a remarkable thing to just appear out of nowhere. It got a lot of press. I think if I remember right, because of the odd way that singles are determined now with streaming and all that kind of thing, it was his very first number one single, which is that'll be a great trivia question 100 years from now. Got a lot of think pieces because people had time to do those as we were all kind of adjusting to this new, incredibly strange, isolating world that the COVID pandemic created. And it set the table for an anticipation of an upcoming album as news started generating that was coming of original material. And just a few months later, he released the album in full. The album hit with critical acclaim, widespread. The site Metacritic is a place I like visiting. It just will kind of take the totality of most mainstream reviews and kind of provide grade points for that as an overall. And for the year, I believe that year it was the second most well-reviewed album behind Fiona Apple's release. And it was a remarkable statement for an artist. I believe at the time of the release, Bob was 80 years old. And since that time, since he was able to start touring again, he has toured this album nearly in its entirety. Each night, he plays almost every song off this album. He does not play Murder Most Foul, the song previously mentioned. But most nights he does all the other 9 songs off this album, mixed with other songs from his catalog, but with the tracks from this record as the centerpiece and the focus. It is just an incredibly dense lyrical record. It continues kind of his trend later career of like a lot of kind of once again that old vibe blues artist swagger on a couple of tracks of False Prophet and Crossing the Rubicon. I think about this a lot. I remember making a playlist and just isolating Bob Dylan's forays into blues throughout his recorded studio albums. Almost every studio album at least will have one or two just straight, structurally blues songs. And it was remarkable. And Crossing the Rubicon might be my favorite Bob Dylan blues song. I think it's remarkable. Let's see. 3 Miles North of Purgatory, One Step from the Great Beyond. I prayed to the cross and I kissed the girls and I crossed the Rubicon. Just excellent stuff. And it feels like a summation album, especially with the closer being Murder Most Foul. And that's an interesting point. I actually got hung up a little bit in like super Bob nerddom in the way that release happened, and I believe it was the CDs, it in the way that Murder Most Foul was released ahead of time, and just the nature of the track was this consideration of was Murder Most Foul the last song of the album, or was it a bonus track? As far as like how I felt about and reflected on the album, especially with, I think, what ended up being the most critically acclaimed song on the record being the song before Murder Most Foul, which is Key West, which has a real natural feel as one of Bob's standard epic closers. So it was a, you know, an interesting thought project, some talks on it on forums and Bob fan sites and that kind of thing. And at some point I kind of realized, hey man, you're being ridiculous. It's side D of the release. Murder Most Foul is the last song of the album. And I actually kind of like, okay, I had to tell myself like, okay, I'm just going to listen to this now without any hesitation about that. And just like that, this is the last track. When I did that, it solidified. I would imagine that this will only climb in my list. I really do think it's that great. But for now, with just a few years relative to the rest of his catalog it has under its belt, it sits at number 10. But it's just Bob and his, to me, unparalleled later career works. Just another amazing release. So at number 10, I've got Rough and Rowdy Ways. From Rough and Rowdy Ways to what I believe, you know, having spent way too much time perusing best of lists and all-time rankings and all that kind of thing, what is considered Bob Dylan's greatest album, which would mean, you know, that it's also considered one of the greatest albums ever made. And that is 1966's Blonde on Blonde. Well, we do it correctly and tilt it sideways or whatever with the full-length double album Bob shot. Yeah, I got it all the way down at number 9. I think people who know me from my previous videos are going to know why, and eyes are going to start rolling. But it is just unavoidable. I don't believe, for me personally, any album suffers more from one track than this does, in that he made the decision and opened the record with Rainy Day Women 12 and 35. I dig the track. I like the energy of what it goes for. Some of the best shows I've ever seen have ended with that song. It's like a coda, it's like an encore. It comes out and vamps up and ramps up. And I think it works well in that context. And I have tried through the years to be like, okay, this is a thing, a headspace thing for me, and I got to get over it. But, you know, it still's the same. You know, I've often considered with this one, more than any other record, if it just did not have that track. I ain't no other rearrangements or anything. You don't need to put it in later or anything like that. If it just started with Pledging My Time, very well could be number 1 for me. But that's we're delving into, for my own self-hang-up perception, a negative in what is just an all-time great album, and my number 9 favorite Bob Dylan album. An insane output bunch of great songs. Visions of Johanna. I think most lists of people say, what are the 5 most otherworldly Bob Dylan great songs ever? The Visions of Johanna might be the number 1 song that comes up. I've just read time and time again of artists who were just like, they heard that and then they just listened to it 50 times in a row because they just could not believe what they are hearing. The encapsulation of the summation of his stream of consciousness lyrics, the groove of the record and the way the band sounded and all of it just coming together. And then you've got, you know, just I Want You, Sooner or Later, Stuck Inside a Mobile, obviously 5 Believers, the epic long ode to his soon-to-be wife, Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands. Just an onslaught double album of great, great, great songs that all do fit together, except for the opening track, in my opinion. Yeah, I think this is kind of one of those. You see this a lot of people talk about it. It's like what much else can you add about one of the most revered and talked about albums of all time? Mentioning it was, well, most people consider it like the first primary double album in rock, and just a table setter and a guidepost for how so much of the rest of rock albums have been uh, looked at and considered. So, yeah. At number 9, got Blonde on Blonde. All right. Number 8, we are returning to the 80s. And boy, it may have been Bob's roughest decade, but he ended with a bang. 1989's Oh Mercy. Absolutely one of Bob's tightest records as far as the sound and the vibe of the songs. It just all is glue. All these songs are right together. Infamously, Daniel Lanois helped produce the record. If I remember right, I believe, as Bob would be wont to do, he probably bellyached some about some of the production of what he did later. But I think also in that, Bob's like, hey, it did a lot to revive and save my career. And, I thought about this when I was thinking about Oh Mercy. Going back to my timeline, once again, getting into Bob Dylan around, when I was in high school. So let's say around 91. So this album was extremely fresh. And to have gotten delved in and turned on by the 60s stuff, then you start to venture out, right? And to have this have been just released, like a relatively brand new record, and to hear undoubtedly that Bob Dylan still had his fastball was incredibly exciting. You were like, he can still release all-time great albums, and that was so invigorating at the time getting into Bob. Everything is Broken on this was the first song I ever saw him perform live. I've mentioned that. Most of the Time, I think, is the most referenced song on this record. It's one of his incredible kind of all-time songs. So I'm saying all-time a lot. We're in the top 10 albums that I think of Bob Dylan, so I'll try not to be too much of a broken record about these unbroken records. But Shooting Star has always been a real personal favorite closer of mine. He did leave off. This is a real interesting thing, too, I think, about this record. One of his very best songs ever, Series of Dreams, which closes out the Bootleg Series Volume 1 through 3. And it is just a fascinating, really interesting new world of sound that this record was opening up. And maybe the best thing he recorded out of all of this, while at the same time, I think I can kind of understand why it didn't get included. As I mentioned, I just think this is just such a tight, perfectly sequenced, perfectly grouped thing of songs. It's that song, in a weird way, may have overwhelmed the record. And so it's kind of one of those crazy, unreal great songs, but I think I kind of understand that choice. It's not one I super fault like I do with some other records, and like, this would have fit perfectly, and how could you have left this off? But yeah, Lanois and Dylan get together. One other thing I wanted to mention, I had the opportunity to do a real Bob nerd thing. I'm a little too lazy to go back in and like insert it, but I had a work trip to New Orleans, and in his book Chronicles, he just happened to be one of like the 4 main chapters of the book. He talked about the recording of Oh Mercy and visiting New Orleans. And they rented out a house and recorded there. And, through Bob Obsessives, it's been discovered which house it was and the address. And I took a little side trip and took a photo in front of the house. It was in this cool, older neighborhood, this 2-story house. I was holding up my baby boy, Henry, in front of it. And it's one of my favorite photos. So I got to visit the house where Oh Mercy was recorded. But yeah, 80s Bob gets redeemed. 1989's Bob Dylan, Oh Mercy, at number 8. Number 7. Whew. We have the years get mixed up for me. All right, good. It's right there clearly on the bottom. 1967's John Wesley Harding. For my taste, in my opinion, right, which is what all this is his most singular work. There's just nothing you can attach to it at all. It really does feel like just from another universe. Kind of in the heyday of, the Woodstock retreat and the writing of these basement tape songs and all of that. He heads down to Nashville and records this record. I believe it was a very short session. I think if I remember reading right, it was like the total time it took to record all this was just hours. So I think it was a very quick session, only with a bass player and drums. There is one guest appearance by a steel guitar player for I'll Be Your Baby Tonight and Down Along the Cove. But the rest is just Charles McCoy on bass and Kenny Boutry on drums. And it is like, it's like Bob Dylan's Aesop Fables. There's these sometimes odd and interesting little vignettes, like you're getting little like partial chapters of like books in song form. And it's really fascinating. A random thing I learned about an odd Bob Dylan fact. That's the same coat he had on Blonde on Blonde. And he also wore it. There was another album that was the same one, like 3 albums in a row. So I guess Bob really dug the coat. Just FYI, weird Bob fact you can have. That's the same coat as on the cover of Blonde on Blonde. But yeah, just a fascinating, interesting group of songs. Every time I've seen Bob Dylan, ever since the first show I saw him in 92, and my brothers do the same, and his friend Rhett, we always do what we call a list of 5, these are 5 songs. Just, I don't base it on anything of what I think he'll do, but what I would love to hear Bob Dylan do. There's been a little bit of a waste of a venture since the Rough and Rowdy Ways tour started, like I've talked about, because the set's almost always the same. But before, he was all over the place, so it'd be kind of cool. You would every once in a while get it. But all that's to say, I Dreamed I Saw St. Augustine has been on my list of 5 every single time. I've never seen it, but at this point, it's just kind of fun. So that obviously is, one of my very favorite Bob Dylan songs. The All Along the Watchtower really does, I think, get kind of the essence of the heart of the mystery and wonder of this album. And, like I said earlier, even Bob says that Jimi Hendrix changed this song for the better, but give me this, the straight from the record version. It's, to me, the most interesting. Dear Landlord and I Pity the Poor Immigrant. Wicked Messenger. Interesting song. I've mentioned on previous videos, I saw this 3-show run in 95, which were the best shows I've ever seen in my life. And during that time, he was opening those shows. He opened all 3 of those shows I saw with Drifter's Escape off of this. Such a righteous show opener, really, really cool, interesting table setter for a concert. I'm always, it's the thing I go back to when I want to listen to one of those tapes and it starts off with that Drifter's Escape. I'm like, oh yeah, we're getting into it. And yeah, I don't know, it's kind of one of those things where I kind of like wonder, like, is this, at some point, maybe this will be the album that like stands the all-time test of time, like hundreds and hundreds of years. This will kind of be the one that's there. There's something in the energy of it that has that feel. But yeah, there's just something about John Wesley Harding. It's always kind of funny, the title track's based on a Western, legend, but his name had no G. It was John Wesley Hardin. So, I've never read up enough to know if that was on purpose or if that just passed all editorial control. And, you know, just wrote the song, sang it as Harding and all that. And then later realized, like, oh, it was John Wesley Hardin. But anyway, that is number 7. That takes us to number 6. 1997's, and I'm getting my cool guy version out. Time Out of Mind. This is the, how do they label it? The 2022 remix from the Unreal Fragments box set. Just from that record. And I think this is like 8 LPs or maybe 10. It's crazy. It could be 50 and I would love all of it. But they did a remixed version. I won't be the hip guy and say I prefer it. There are a couple of tracks in it. The one that stands out to most to me is Dirt Road Blues off the album that I do prefer. But you start messing with something like Time Out of Mind. You know, it's like, okay, Bob, it's Bob, so he gets to do that. And this one for sure, Oh Mercy, I wasn't quite as sure. But when we went back to Daniel Lanois, and he's, you know, he really... He has really come out and stated, you know, the swampiness of that sound was a little heavy for him. So some of these mixes reflect that. They're not quite as swamped out. But, you know, as I was thinking about this album, is once again going back to my timeline and when I got into Bob. This was the first new music release from the time that I got into him. And yeah, myself, both of my brothers, a friend down my brother's street in Macon, Georgia. It was about a group of 6 of us. We all got together and listened to it together for our first listen. And the impact of that, we all still talk about that. Every person that was there to this day. The energy and the juice of knowing in real time that you were hearing an elite level new Bob Dylan album, which, you know, you didn't know if that was something you were ever going to get to do. If those were always like, oh, I always wonder what it was like if you were just there when insert whatever Bob Dylan album came out. But it happened. We got to do it. And it wouldn't be the last time, but that impact, you know, from the opening notes of Lovesick, and it's such a mood-setting album anyway. It is transportive in that way. Anyway, the nature of the album. So those two things combined, it was you know, the most impactful listening moment I've ever had in my life. There are live moments that are different, and you know, different entities are the same way. But it was the most impactful listening moment. It was just unreal. And yeah. Bob climbed back on top of the world. He was, you know, up front, and in his backing of the album and in the press and that kind of stuff, he wasn't being half-hearted about things. He had a lot of confidence in this record, you could tell. You know, he won album for Grammy of the Year. I think one of the Radiohead records lost to it, and I think that gets, you know, that's like a debate for history. It's like, whatever, I mean, the Grammys, whatever, but, you know, it was cool as a Bob fan to see him win just because he was so invested in the record. He infamously, the performance that the dancer crashed and soy bombed. I don't have trouble with that. I don't dislike the guy or anything, but I will say that performance, I think if you go and you look at the official upload now, they've disappeared the dancer from it, which I'm like, that's really a lot of work technology wise. And but the actual performance, I would say, you know, Bob's cameras, he gets weird and has not been his best. To me, that's his very best televised performance he's ever had, was doing Lovesick on the Grammys. That performance, no other term for it, just kicked ass. You know, I know when he accepted his award, he quoted a blues guy. He's like, the stuff I gotta bust your brains out, man. And the stuff on this does. The opening track, Standing in the Doorway, Trying to Get to Heaven, Not Dark Yet, my God, Cold Irons Bound, Make You Feel My Love. That's been a good mailbox money, Bob, for song. Oft covered, I can't imagine. I wonder at this point with, there's blowing in the wind and that kind of stuff, but I wonder, I sometimes wonder, like, oh, what song makes Bob the most money? And I wonder if Make You Feel My Love might end up coming out on top. Can't wait. It ends with a great recycling blues track, Highlands, with the returns to him, like, someday I will be going off to this mythical highlands, and interspersed with like narrative from his own life. I always love in the song, he's like, I'm listening to Neil Young, I got to turn up the sound, and I'm always like, how cool is it to be Neil Young? Like, closing out Bob's, most renowned latter-day career album, he just directly mentions you and says the music he's listening to by you, he's got to turn up the sound. That's the shout outs of all shout out, in my opinion. And let me look at my notes here because, just claim to my own fame. I think Bob live wise, this would be my biggest claim to fame, is I got to see the US opener of the Time Out of Mind shows. I mean, it's always the ongoing tour, but I saw the first show that he did after this album came out in the US in Starkville, Mississippi. And in it, I remember he did Lovesick, and he did Cold Irons Bound. Cold Irons Bound from Starkville, Mississippi. Woo! That was fire, and it was really exciting. And this was the first time I ever performed for these songs, and they would become live staples. And to have gotten to see those was excellent. And there we are. We have gotten to number 6, and that was Time Out of Mind. And that means we've just got 5 left to go on my countdown of my favorite Bob Dylan albums. Like I've said in the last couple, thanks for tagging along. One more to go.